70,000 gallons of fuel leaves the depot. In North Africa, 30,000 arrives at the front line, a 57% loss. The quartermaster in charge reports this as a good effort. This was the reality of Allied logistics in World War II. The solution existed since 1940, but American engineers changed one invisible detail that turned German perfection into a leaking disaster that cost the Allies dearly. September 1942. American chemical engineer Richard M. Daniel arrives in Egypt, sent by the War Department to investigate reports of catastrophic fuel losses in the desert. Campaign against Rommel's Africa Corps. The situation is worse than Washington imagined. British quartermaster units report losses of 30 to 40% between port and front line. War correspondent Alan Moorhead observed, the great bulk of the British Army was forced to stick to the old flimsy 4-gallon container. It could put a couple of petrol cans in the back of a truck. 2 hours of bumping over desert rocks usually produced a suspicious smell. British General Einleck estimates 30% of all fuel never reaches its destination. In one documented case, 70,000 imperial gallons leave the depot. Only 30,000 gallons arrive, a 57% loss. The quartermaster considers this a good effort. The British are using containers soldiers call flimsies, thin tin cans with soldered seams. For gallon capacity, they buckle when stacked, split when dropped, leak when heated. The seams fail constantly. Many of these flimsies are packed in pairs in wooden cases, later replaced by plywood and eventually cardboard, making them effectively single-use containers. Discarded once emptied. American containers aren't much better. 5-gallon rectangular cans with screw caps and cork gaskets. Designs dating back to World War I. 55-gallon drums requiring pumps. Equipment designed for stationary storage, not mechanized desert warfare. Daniel watches fuel seep into sand. Soldiers struggle with containers, requiring wrenches, funnels, and 2 men to pour. The entire Allied logistics system hemorrhages the one resource that powers everything. He sends a cable to Washington estimating 40% fuel losses. Years later, in his 1987 article, "The Little Can That Could," Daniel admitted, this figure was actually a guess, intended to provoke alarm. Whether 40%, Einleck's documented 30%, or that specific 57% case, the losses are devastating. The Germans face no such crisis. But soldiers capturing German supply dumps find green steel containers that look new after months of desert use. The containers become more valuable than almost any other captured equipment. Soldiers hoard them. Supply officers request them by name. After the second capture of Benghazi at the end of 1941, large numbers of Axis Gerians were captured, sufficient to equip elite units such as the Long-Range Desert Group, who by early 1942 had switched entirely from flimsies to these captured German containers. The Wehrmacht Einheits canister armed forces unit canister was developed in 1937 by German engineer Vinzenz Grunvogel at Müller Engineering Works in Schwelm, Westphalia, after a competitive tender in 1935. Through 36, a test series of 5,000 cans was sent to troops in 1936 for field trials. The German Army officially adopted it on July 8, 1937 via Order HM number 324. 3 years of testing and refinement before the war began. By 1939, the German military had stockpiled thousands of these cans in anticipation of war. Motorized troops were issued jerry cans, along with lengths of rubber hose to siphon fuel from any available source. A tactical advantage supporting their rapid advance through Poland at the war's start. The designed 20 layers approximately 5.3 US gallons, 2 stamped sheets of steel, welded together with the recessed X-shaped seam running across both faces. The seam construction would prove crucial. The interior featured a dip coat of paint to protect against corrosion. 3 handles, 2 short ones on the sides for one-handed carrying, 1 long, 1 across the top for two-handed carrying or passing in a chain. The Wehrmacht had specifically required that a soldier should be able to carry either 2 full containers or 4 empty ones, which determined the triple handle configuration. The handles are recessed, so cans stack without interference. A soldier carries 2 full cans comfortably. A strong soldier carries for the cap, not a screw top, but a cam lever system with an internal breather pipe, a hole in the closure, retainer allowed for a securing pin or wire with a lid seal. Flip the lever. The seal releases. Air enters through the breather. Fuel pours smoothly, without gugging. One person pours the entire can in seconds. No funnel, no second person, no wrench required. Air chamber design would even keep the can afloat if it fell into water. The X-shaped indentations pressed into both faces serve 3 critical engineering purposes. First, structural rigidity. The crease creates 4 triangular sections much stiffer than flat panels. Second, expansion relief. Gasoline expands roughly 2 to 3% when heated, and the indentation flexes outward to relieve pressure. Third, when fuel cools and contracts, the indentation flexes back, preventing vacuum pressure. The design was classified as a military secret, with its patent filed in 1939, but kept from public knowledge until Allied forces captured examples during the war. German testing shows minimal losses and superior durability. The container survives drops, impacts, extreme heat, extreme cold, stackable, portable, fast to use. In 1939, American engineer Paul Pleiss had built a vehicle to journey to India with a German colleague. After building the car, they realized they lacked storage for emergency water. The German engineer had access to the stockpile of jerry cans at Berlin Tempelhof Airport and managed to take 3 of them also, providing PLC with complete specifications for manufacturing the can. The account claims PS continued to Kolkata, stored his car and flew back to Philadelphia, where simplified what they changes invisible from outside the seam construction. The German jerry can uses a welded seam. 2 stamped steel halves are pressed together and electric resistance welded along the X-shaped joint. The weld is recessed below the surface, strong, sealed, extensively tested. The American version uses rolled seams. The edges of the 2 halves are folded together and crimped, faster to manufacture, requires less specialized equipment, cheaper. The U.S. design was slightly lighter than the German can, 10 pounds versus 11.5 pounds for the German version. For containers holding water or non-volatile liquids, it works adequately. For gasoline and desert heat, it proves disastrous. Richard M. Daniel later wrote with the authority of a chemical engineer who witnessed the consequences. As any petroleum engineer knows, it is unsafe to store gasoline in a container with rolled seams. The crimped metal joint, flexing under temperature changes and impact stress, develops microscopic gaps, not gushing leaks, seepage, a slow, steady loss that multiplies across thousands of containers. American engineers also remove or simplify the interior breather tube in some versions requiring separate tools. For pouring, they eliminate the interior plastic lining present in German fuel cans. The rolled seam is the critical failure. Production begins. Tens of thousands of American jerry cans shipped to North Africa, the Pacific training bases. immediately, universally, perform worse than German originals. Leaks aren't dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarm. A wet ring around the cap, a slight gasoline smell, a dark stain under stacked cans in the sun. Multiply that seepage by thousands of containers. Losses become significant. Not as bad as British flimsies, but far worse than German jerry cans. American jerry cans arrive in North Africa in late 1941 and throughout 1942. As Daniel documents the fuel crisis, Allied logistics officers sort containers into 3 categories. German jerry cans for critical operations, American jerrycans for less demanding uses, British flimsies for everything else. Thrilled seams fail identically to British soldered seams. Temperature cycling in. Desert heat destroys them. The temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Nighttime temperatures drop 40 to 50 degrees. Metal expands and contracts. Seams flex. Microscopic gaps become visible gaps. Daniel's September 1942 alarm cable reaches Washington. His 40% estimate, admittedly designed to provoke alarm, wasn't far from documented British estimates of 30% or that specific 57%. Plus, the War Department finally notices, not because of 1940 warnings, not because of obvious German engineering superiority, because Allied operations are strangling on their own logistics. Tanks run out of fuel during operations. In late August 1942, Rommel made a final attempt to break through at the Lamhalle, but was repulsed, short of fuel and supplies, unable to sustain his offensive. Supply columns carry double requirements because everyone knows significant portions won't arrive. The response isn't fixing American manufacturing. The response is letting the British handle it. British factories in 1943 begin mass-producing faithful copies of the German original. Welded seams, full internal breather tubes, proper plastic linings, no manufacturing shortcuts. Early 1943, 2 million British-made jerry cans shipped to North Africa. By early 1944, jerry cans were being manufactured in the Middle East as well. Millions more follow for the European campaign. These British jerry cans work, don't leak. They survive desert heat and European mud. They stack properly, pour quickly. Everything the German original was now manufactured by the British. American production continues, making inferior rolled seam versions alongside British welded versions. Fuel and other petroleum products, which represented about 50% of all supply needs measured by weight in overseas theaters. A single standard US 2.5-ton truck could carry 875 US gallons of fuel, loaded in jerry cans. The shortage would haunt Allied logistics throughout the European campaign. August 1944, lack of cans caused by losses actually limited the supply of fuel that could be brought forward to combat units, even though the fuel itself was available in rear areas. Patton's rapid advance across France came to an abrupt halt at Metz in early September, due to fuel shortages, deteriorating weather, and increased enemy resistance. His Third Army had outrun its supply. By October 1944, 3.5 million jerry cans were unaccounted for because the Canfer system was often disregarded. According to official logistics records, these cans were found in a trail from Normandy to the West Wall. Hundreds of thousands lay in abandoned dumps and bivouacs. Thousands more were used to build sidewalks in the mud or used as chairs. The Quartermaster Corps concluded in early January 1945 that not 800,000 but 1.3 million new cans were needed each. By VE Day in May 1945, over 19 million jerry cans were required. to support U.S. forces in the European theater alone. Total Allied production reached approximately 21 to 22 million jerry cans of various designs. President Roosevelt observed in November 1944, "Without these cans, it would have been impossible for our armies to cut their way across France at a lightning pace." The exact volume of fuel lost, specifically to American rolled seam jerry cans, cannot be calculated from surviving records, as Daniel noted in his 1987 article. Little about the jerry appears in the official record. The bureaucracy that initially rejected the superior German design continued, minimizing documentation of the problem. What is documented? Severe Allied fuel losses in 1942 through 43, German container superiority, British manufacturing of proper welded copies by 1943, and eventual Allied logistics improvement. The German jerry can succeed because Grunvogel and every design decision was made when good enough is assumed without field testing. Post-war military specifications governing jerry can construction eventually mandated welded seams, effectively abandoning the American rolled seam approach. The NATO standard 20L military fuel container used today is essentially the 1937 German design, with minor modifications codified in specifications like MLC 283F. From 1985 and its successors, the jerry can remains in use worldwide, still recognizable as the 1937 design, still manufactured with welded seams, because that's what works. So, testament to getting every detail right. The first time. Military bases, UN. Relief operations, expedition vehicles. Nearly 90 years later, the basic design hasn't needed fundamental changes. The American rolled seam versions are now collector's items and cautionary tales. Germany created a masterpiece through necessity and thorough engineering. America initially botched the copy through cost-cutting and assumptions. The design that prevailed was the one where every detail had a purpose. Engineering details matter. Manufacturing shortcuts have costs. Sometimes the best approach is faithful replication of proven excellence. The jerry story reminds us that in visible engineering choices often matter more than visible features. The institutional resistance to foreign innovation carries real consequences. That in engineering as in war, details determine outcomes.